Partial funding for the operation of this channel is provided by the City of Oceanside.
This program brought to you by the caring hands of Tri-City Medical Center.
Welcome to the Voice of Oceanside. Today, we continue our discussion of what to expect in the wake of a natural disaster. Chris Chauncey from Be Ready Incorporated is joining us again, and we're going to talk about the aftermath of a natural disaster, specifically an earthquake, and how you and your family can prepare. Welcome back, Chris.
Thanks for having me.
Now, let's do the setup of what they have to prepare for. We're going to assume that there's a 7.8 on the San Andreas Fault. So paint the picture for us of what it's going to be like here in North County immediately after that event. Let's start with transportation.
With the transportation area, basically you're going to have the major freeways that will be disrupted. There will be no travel in and out of the southern portion of California. After we have the earthquake, the 5 freeway, as part of the disaster plan, will be shut down from Oceanside northward. So you won't even be able to travel on that particular freeway north of Oceanside. With that, you will also have a lot of damage with the roads in intercity, which makes it difficult for not only relief to get there, but your typical first responder care, like ambulances and medical care. And also if there are fires, which they anticipate many fires after a large-scale earthquake like that, it's not uncommon that you won't be able to get the fire relief or the fire trucks or any of the personnel out there to take care of the fires. We saw that in Northridge back in 1994. There were several fires. Entire neighborhoods went up in flames, and all they could do is watch them burn because they couldn't get there because the roads were disrupted.
In your research, have you come across any percentage on bridges? Do we assume they're all gone or half of them are gone?
Well, depending on the report you read, everybody is making an estimation because we don't know exactly how bad the damage is going to be. It also depends on if the fault only goes part way or if it ruptures for the entire 220 miles. And that becomes significant if it does. The anticipation is, depending on the area, most of the bridges will actually be out, and you will see, again, travel within areas like in the desert area. The bridges up there haven't been retrofitted, and those people in the desert area actually are going to be trapped where they're not going to have access to the rest of Southern California, and they won't be able to access the rest of the country either. They're going to be in their own little area in and of itself, and the only relief they're going to be able to get is from Arizona, and they anticipate the first responders to get there about 2 to 3 weeks later. So with all the disruptions that we have in travel, one of the key concerns is the fact that the first responders are going to take a time to get here. And the overall emergency plan is it will take 2 to 3 weeks to get things here as fast as they want to. And remember, first responders aren't the ones that bring food and water. That is just to come in and take care of medical needs and to help set up shelters and those types of things.
So as folks are driving around out there, if you wanted to make the worst case or most conservative, safest assumption, don't plan on getting over the first bridge, however far that is from your house.
Especially depending on where you're located. The other part of that with the travel disruptions is understanding how long it's going to take to get the roads back up and running. The overall game plan in restoral is that it's going to take 140 to 220 days before these major roads are back up and fully running again. So it's a significant amount of time. It's not like we're going to have them repaired in a couple of weeks and everything's back up to normal. They anticipate economically that this earthquake will cost the state of California about $213 billion. That's the size and scope of this particular rupture.
Moving on to water, it's a critical issue here in California in normal times. What's the projection?
Well, first of all, 90% of the water for Southern Californians is imported from outside resources. And the three major pipelines that import that water all pass over the San Andreas Fault. So with a complete rupture, all three of those will be severed, and we won't have any access to the normal water lines that we're used to having. And that's fairly significant. There are some areas that have established, knowing that this is going to be an ongoing problem after the San Andreas, there are certain cities that are trying to establish reservoirs. There's a few of them down in San Diego, for instance, and they're all gravity fed. So if the power goes out, there will be some water going through the pipelines. But as we experienced in our recent blackout, any water that passes through the pipelines after a blackout is contaminated because it hasn't gone through the typical purification process. The other part of the problem with any water passing through the pipelines is they're right next to all the sewer lines as well. So with those severed, you're going to have the sewage itself mixing itself with the water supply, anything that's coming towards the homes that we would have access to. So water is going to be a problem. The Water Recovery Department, which has been developed by the state specifically to come up with a plan and to determine how California is going to get back on its feet, had a meeting back in July of 2007. Their anticipation is Southern California will be without water for at least 3 weeks, if not up to 6 months or longer. And again, it has to do with the roads and the inability to get the pipes where they need to go to repair. And with ongoing aftershocks, the continued disruption of the lines and the actual repair work that they do, we tell people plan on that 6-month category because nobody knows for sure exactly who's going to have access to water until it actually happens. And that becomes critical because a person can't live without water, clean drinking water, longer than 3 days. And when you have 20 million people impacted by this particular earthquake looking for fresh, clean drinking water, that becomes a serious issue. And it's going to take a period of time. I know that they want to have bottled water companies pump out as much as they can and do airdrops to communities. But with power outages, it's going to make it extremely difficult. So it becomes critical in your emergency disaster plan that you consider the disruptions that are involved with water.
You know, it's pretty easy to understand why there's so much denial on this, because as you start to dig into it, it seems that it's quickly becomes a problem that's almost unsolvable.
The worst problem we run into when we do seminars is people not only going into denial, but they really don't believe it's going to happen at this particular level. It really can't happen this way. That's what their reaction is. And but every agency out there has come up with the same disaster plan and recovery efforts, and that's what's expected. We can't go into denial in the fact that we import 90% of our water. That's just a fact. And we know, for instance, Carlsbad, Oceanside areas, we import 100% of our water here. So having some sort of water storage has to be a part of a disaster or emergency plan for every family.
So the transportation, and of course we have to remember this is all going to happen at once. We're talking about this sequentially, but obviously it will all happen at once. Transport impacts the ability to get water. Obviously also impacts the ability to get food.
Absolutely. All your normal lines, your shipping lines that bring food into your stores are not going to have that capacity. And that's the part that people need to plan on the most. If you don't have food in your cupboard and you're not one of the lucky few to get to a store within 2 to 3 hours after a disaster, what you have is what you get. And as we've seen in other countries with large-scale disasters, like Haiti, for instance, they had large-scale food shortages for a long period of time. They were always fighting over whatever water and food supplies they could find. Now, I know we consider that to be a third world country, but we're going to see the similar situation here when it comes to food shortages. You're just not going to have access to it. So again, whatever you have in your cupboard is what you're going to have access to. Depending on how fast they can get the roads back up and running and how fast they can get the transport moving is going to determine how soon we can get our relief efforts in here for food. But expect 3 weeks. Even the Red Cross says plan on at least 2 to 3 weeks with food and water. So if it's 2 to 3 weeks when the first responders get there, realize Red Cross, when they come in, they bring a comb, a toothbrush, toothpaste. Other church relief agencies come in with blankets and clothing items. Nobody's bringing in food or water. And we live right next to a large supply of water, but we can't use it because it's salt water. So unless you have some kind of a desal water system, it's of no use to us. So.
And if the water is 90% imported, the food's probably close to 100% imported in terms of the manner in which we ingest it. There might be some raw food out there somewhere.
Depending on the time of year, too. You know, if it's in the spring, you have access to fields with strawberries. So there are fields and supplies out there for raw goods. But again, you're going to see those go rather quickly when the supply is in short.
And of course, the next one up is power. Absolutely.
For those of us here in San Diego area that were impacted by that recent outage, we got a real lesson of what it's going to be like. The California Emergency Management Agency said after the San Andreas, again, if it's rupturing the entire 220-mile stretch, it's going to hit that 7.8 to 8.0 category. Most, if not all, of the power grids will be completely out. And they said it will take up to 6 months for most areas, if not up to 12, before they can get all of them back up and restored. There may be certain isolated areas that may have some power, but nobody can say where, and nobody dares predict. But based on the amount of shaking and what they anticipate, we're going to have large, long-term power outages. And as we saw in Japan, even last June, I remember listening to the news. Their power was fully restored, but they had another 7-point category magnitude aftershock, and they were all without power again. And with the 10,000 aftershocks they're anticipating, you can bet that every time one that's a 6.0 or greater hits, that you're going to see another power outage as they're trying to restore those power grids. So whatever you have in your house, flashlights, batteries, propane, anything you have is all you'll have access to in relationship to power during that period of time.
You know, it's almost too much to even think about as I'm listening to this, because you can't help but tree off and think about the fact that whoever's repairing the power needs water.
Absolutely.
Etc. And food. And
well, they're all definitely interrelated. All of these
it's all interrelated, and I assume there's somebody factoring that into the planning. But at some point, it just becomes whatever happens, happens.
Exactly. Well, the other thing, there's optimism over the fact that Carlsbad has a desal plant that's in the process of being built. It's about 3 years out from completion, but you still need power to be able to operate the desal plant. Everything operates off of power.
And if it's locally generated power, it needs fuel.
Absolutely.
Which means roads.
Absolutely.
Or a pipeline that doesn't exist.
And the other thing to consider in your disaster plan is if I'm down in San Diego, there were several people that were gridlocked in traffic during our blackout recently for 3 to 4 hours. They couldn't move, and many cars ran out of gas because they couldn't pump gas because the power was out. So for people that think they're going to go fill up their car, it's not going to happen. Same thing with a neighbor of mine that had a generator. He was lucky to have a generator, ran for 3 hours, and he ran out of gas. So he went over to the gas station. Again, they couldn't pump it. Other things that we learned from that aspect was that you can't access an ATM. There's no cash available from an ATM once the power's out, and you can't pay with a card. So when people did get to a grocery store or to a gas station, they were buying supplies like ice, which typically in a large-scale disaster, the first things that go are the water and the batteries. But in this case, they were trying to save their food, so people were buying ice to throw in their refrigerators. So the ice was the first thing to go, batteries second, but a lot of people were disappointed. The only thing they had in their pocket was plastic, and they couldn't use it. So the infrastructure in general suffers greatly once something this large actually happens.
All right, we've painted the picture. I don't even want to get into medical care. I think we've painted the picture appropriately. Let's talk about what we can do. We're going to break this down over our time remaining into what can you do before, what should you or almost have to do during, and what are your options afterwards. So let's start with the preparation. What should people start doing right now?
Well, the first thing you need to do is put together a disaster plan. And as you pointed out, the disaster plan considers the before, during, and after. You need to know how you're going to react during the earthquake. But in addition to that, you need to know how to prepare what to do before. For example, in Northridge, 10% of the fatalities in the Northridge earthquake were as a result of objects within the homes actually falling on the people. So in your house, what you need to do is prepare by securing large objects. If you have a chandelier, make sure it's secured. If you have a china cabinet, an entertainment center, all those things up against the wall, they're going to move. With the movement of the San Andreas, the ground is going to be moving and shifting back and forth 6 feet. So when you consider that movement going back and forth 6 feet, it won't take long before the objects inside start to collapse. So you have to be able to ensure your safety. You want to make sure all that stuff is secure. Same thing with frames, picture frames. Glass hits the ground. All of those things that can fall down will, and you want to make sure they're secure to minimize the risk.
Is there such a thing as an expert that can tour the house and help you with this?
I know there have been agencies that actually do that. On our website, learntobeready.com, if you go to our More Info page, there are 2 quizzes you can take there, and they were established by agencies that teach people what they're supposed to do. And on there, as you take the quiz, they will show you, based on your household scenario, what's secured and what you're prepared for and what you're not prepared for. And I strongly recommend that you actually do that. The other thing to consider is there is a booklet out, actually put out by the California Emergency Management Agency and the California Earthquake Authority. It's called Putting Down Roots in Earthquake Country. It's a 32-page guide, and in there's a checklist of things that you should do in your home. You can actually request these, but my understanding is they've run out, and with budget cuts, they're not accessible. So again, if you go to our website, learntobeready.com, and go to that More Info page, we have this on a PDF. You can actually download it and print it off for yourself so you have a copy.
You know, I had an aha moment the other day, about a month ago. Friends of ours bought us a beautiful glass bowl, and I was on a mission to find a floating candle to put in it. And the other day I was thinking about this show. I was, I have to go down to KOCT and film a show on earthquakes, and I'm thinking, wait a minute, I probably shouldn't have a puddle of fuel in my house with a flame in it a couple of miles from a fault zone. And you know, minor thing like that could turn into a complete disaster in my apartment, which only has one way out.
Right. Fires are a definite concern in relationship to earthquakes. As a matter of fact, in San Francisco, even with all those buildings collapsing, the majority of the fatalities from the San Francisco earthquake came as a result of fires. You will see large-scale fires. They're predicting over 1,600 fires, half of which will be mega fires. As the pipelines are disrupted, it will cause fires within the system, and they'll continue to travel into the neighborhoods. So as part of the planning process, you want to make sure you know where the shutoff valve is. If you get up after an earthquake and smell gas, you need to immediately go and shut that off.
Let's talk about a couple specifics. And our goal here, and obviously in a show of this length, is basically to get people motivated to follow up. We can't provide all the information,
right.
And everyone should know that this show doesn't make them prepared. Maybe we can motivate them. Let's talk about the 72-hour kit.
Absolutely. The 72-hour kit is kind of the fundamental foundation for every disaster plan. As we've seen so many fires here in San Diego and North San Diego County, for instance, anytime you have to evacuate, you want to make sure you have a 72-hour kit, very similar to this one, that you can grab, which has your vital information and vital elements in it that you can run out with at any given time. And if you have to evacuate your house as a result of, say, even a mega fire after an earthquake, you don't have much time to react. You're not going to be able to go into your kitchen and conveniently put things together, grab some clothes out of your drawer. You're going to have to grab the first thing you possibly can. So most people put a 72-hour kit into something similar to this, a backpack. I've seen some in cartons. I've actually seen some in a 55-gallon trash can. Just remember, the bigger they are, the harder they are to move around. If you have children, you're going to want to have something that allows you to be hands-free, something like a backpack where I can use my arms and hands to the extent that I need to. One of the cautions in relationship to this, there's a number of companies and stores out there that sell these. You can normally tell what's in them based on the cost. If they're around the $30 range, there's not much in there, and there's a lot of them out there that really don't provide what you need in relationship to a disaster. Critical items for a 72-hour kit is to make sure you have enough water and food for 72 hours. We recommend that you pack that for 2 people, so you have enough to cover for that 72-hour period of time. So with that, some of the items that we recommend in a backpack include a first aid kit, for example, something that you have available in the event that there are any injuries. Another thing would be some type of radio. We recommend solar power. We're real big into solar power right now because batteries, you can never have enough batteries. And if I'm with power for up to 3 weeks, it won't take long until I run through what I actually have. So solar power is really inexpensive. And with something like this, even, for example, it has a wind-up feature. So if I'm using it at night and I've used up all my solar power that I've stored, the wind-up allows me to continue to use it. You need a radio so you have access to information as much as you possibly can. We also recommend blankets, like a Mylar blanket, things that you have to keep warm with, along with the clothing items. We also have what's called a Seychelles water bottle, and these particular items here are designed up in Orange County, and they have a filter system that allows you to run dirty water through it, and it comes out 99.99% pure. They're a phenomenal item that people can take advantage of, but we include these and recommend those along with the water supplies within a 72-hour kit. We have lanterns, for instance, same type of thing, where they have a feature that you can either store power through the solar portion, or it has a wind-up feature, so you have light that you can use in the event that it goes out. So a 72-hour kit has to have important items in it like this. We recommend medications, anything that you need for your children or babies. You also should have in there cash. Exactly, and also important documents. Copies of your driver's license, passport, birth certificate, those types of things become vital as well in case you don't have access to them in the future.
Okay, I think we've given a flavor of what to do before, maybe 1%, but you did mention there's resources. The state provides some, your website's another.
Right.
What about during? Let's move into that phase.
The during aspect, the most important thing for people to do is not to run in the event of an earthquake, and not to run outside if they're inside a building. The thing you're supposed to do is stay put. If I'm in a bed and the earthquake ruptures at night, they recommend you stay in the bed. Cover your head with a pillow and stay put, and teach your children to do exactly the same thing. As part of a disaster plan, you need to decide with your family what you're planning on doing, so you know exactly what to do during that particular portion. If you run down the hall while an earthquake is taking place, you're going to step on glass. That's the most common injury that takes place during an earthquake or immediately following. So stay put, drop cover, and hold on is the technique that everyone is teaching today. Even in the schools, they're running drills where if there's an earthquake and shaking begins, get underneath a table, a desk, something, and then hold on to that object, because if you don't, it'll be moving along with the movement of the earthquake. That's the most important thing you can do. If you're in a car, pull over when it's safe. Avoid overpasses and bridges if at all possible. But pull over and wait for it to happen. If you are outside, stay put. If you're near a tall building, move away from the building, because things will fall from the building.
So if you're outside, stay outside. If you're inside, stay inside. And I guess if you're right on the cusp, you would move outside to move away from a
If I was in the doorway, absolutely.
If you're in the doorway, outside is better.
Absolutely.
Okay.
And the two techniques that people have thought to use in the past are now they're now educating to do the exact opposite. For instance, it was always thought to stand in a doorway during an earthquake. They don't recommend that anymore, because in a doorway, the doors can fly. during an earthquake, and also glass typically flies around doorways. So they don't recommend you stand in front of a doorway. You're better off getting in the middle of a room and finding something to cover yourself with. The other one was a technique called the triangle of life. There was an individual that came out with that years ago and claimed that instead of getting underneath something, you should get next to something. Like if I'm underneath a bridge and I'm in my car and I'm stuck, get to the side of your car and or to the side of your bed or to the side of an object. And if you go to the Red Cross website, they will tell you that's a complete fraud and to actually avoid that technique.
Okay. Any other one point on during before we move to the after?
Those are the most important points.
Okay. How about after, in order?
Well, the first thing you do is check for injuries. See if you have any injuries and deal with them as you possibly can. But if you find you're in particular okay, you become a first responder. That's the recommendation. And a first responder gets up and checks on everybody else. The first thing I would do as a family man, I would get up and check my family first. See if there are any particular needs of theirs that I can take care of. Once they're taken care of, then I move outside and check for neighbors and see if there's anything that I can do there. It's highly effective as part of the planning if you can have a neighborhood meeting, a planning session, and decide who's going to do what during and after an earthquake and how they can help each other out. As a matter of fact, in Japan, that's one of the ways that they were able to survive that magnitude of an earthquake as well as they did, is that the neighborhoods became cohesive and helped each other out. And that becomes important. So once I've checked on everyone, the next thing I want to check is make sure I don't have any gas leaks or down power lines. If I have a gas leak, I should shut it off. I should also immediately shut off the water from my hot water heater. That provides easily 30, 40 gallons of water, but the contaminated water will start to go through the system if you don't turn it off as fast as you can. So hopefully in your planning process, you have a wrench immediately available for either one of those that you can immediately shut them off and have access to them.
You probably want to turn off the in and the out to the water heater,
right,
to preserve that quantity of water.
Right.
Okay.
So that's the first step that I would actually take in the after process. As part of the planning process or the before getting into what to do the after part is making sure you have adequate food and water in supply that you're able to take care of yourself. And what we're recommending is that people store water. And for those that have neighbors that may have done that in the past, they typically look at those types of people as hoarders. That's a name that they've used for them. And I know particular church groups that have been discussing that for years amongst their members, is to have food and water on supply in the event of disasters. And they've always been looked at as hoarders, but not anymore based on the disasters today. You should have at least 2 to 3 weeks of food and water on supply. We recommend 30 to 90 days. And if you have access to food after 30 days, then you're all the better for it. But you may have neighbors or family members that you want to help out as well. If you have a little bit extra, you're able to do that. But water containers that you can store them in, make sure that they're food grade. There's smaller containers. You want portable units. In the event that you have to move, water weighs 8 pounds per gallon. So if I have a 55-gallon drum, over 400 pounds, I'm not moving it very fast. But if I have a 5-gallon or a 3.5-gallon container that I can easily pick up and transport with me, it's recommended that you have those. Another thing that you should have in relationship to water is water stored in the trunk of your car. More than likely, coming back to the myths that we talked about before, one of the myths about earthquakes is they happen early in the morning. And that is a complete myth. So it can happen any time of day.
Chris,
you can be at work.
Believe it or not, we're out of time.
Oh, wow.
But that's not a bad point to end at. It can happen at any time, so get prepared now. And I want to thank you for joining us and giving us all this great information.
You bet.
So do something with this info and get prepared. You won't be able to do it perfectly, but you'll be able to do something, and you will be glad you did after it happens. Thanks for watching this edition of The Voice of Oceanside, and remember, as always, it's available on our website at koct.org. Thanks for viewing.